So my name is Oved. I'm a senior software engineer for Red Hat, and today I'm going to talk about scripting and integration with oVirt. So the agenda will be as follows. I'll start with a small oVirt introduction, just in case you don't know the project or you didn't use the project before. And then I'm going to divide this session into two parts. The first one, we'll talk about the REST-based APIs that we have in the oVirt engine. I'll start with an introduction to that. Then I'm going to show the three types of APIs we have: the regular API, the shell command, the oVirt shell, which is the CLI. I'll show some demo of that, and the SDK. Then I'm going to briefly talk about Delta Cloud APIs and how they can be used also with the oVirt engine. Now that part is basically the basics for the second part, in which we'll talk about how we can extend the functionality of the oVirt engine and modify its behavior in different fields using UI plugins to change the UI, scheduling APIs or scheduling plugins in order to change the way oVirt schedules VMs in its environment, and VDSM hooks. Now the first two, UI plugins and scheduling API, are also, you would basically use them in addition to using the oVirt SDK, for example, in order to do different operations. So that's why I divided it into these two sections. I'll just start and say that there are a few sessions tomorrow regarding oVirt. One of them is a session by Omer Frankel that talks about another type of integration we have with Cloud Init, integration with Cloud Init. Omer is sitting over here. And we have an oVirt Developer Day at the KVM Forum, in which we plan to discuss different issues. It's practically a stage for us to say how we see the product in the future, and a stage for you to say what you want to see in it. I guess there will be many open discussions over there in different issues, so you will have the opportunity to share your thoughts about the project and what you want to see in it. So I recommend going there. I also have here some USB on a sticks of oVirt. You can feel free to take them when the session ends. If you will be bad participants, I might throw it at you. So, and it's an intimate session, so you can feel free to move forward or something. But so, are you familiar with oVirt? Everyone here? Who isn't familiar? Okay, so basically oVirt is a large-scale centralized management environment for desktop and server virtualization. Basically, it gives you a way to manage your data center based on leading performance, scalability, and security technologies. It's based on KVM in its main backend, and it basically provides an open source alternative to vSphere or vCenter if you got a chance to work with these products. A very powerful product, a large community behind it. Many companies also contribute to the project. We have a Fedora release, and then we take this release and also release Red Hat Enterprise Virtualization as a product. But today we came here only to discuss the oVirt project. So that basically the project is solved. So we'll start with the REST-based API. I guess some of you or many people here are familiar with REST, but I'll give some basics about that as well. So when looking at oVirt, what can we do with the REST API? So basically we can do infrastructure configuration to configure hosts, configure networks, configure storage in the system, provision new virtual machines, manage users, do different daily maintenance that we need to do in our environment. We can do basically anything that can be done with the oVirt engine through the API. Some operations are exposed through the API, but they aren't even exposed through the UI, because the flow doesn't make sense to put them there. But if you work with the API, you can do everything and beyond what can be done in the UI. So where you should use it? You'll probably use it in scripting and utilities. If you have another software you're writing and you want to integrate it with the oVirt engine, if you want to do some task automation in your system, provision new virtual machines, manage new virtual machines. You want to do some add-on, performance monitoring of your environment, reports. The oVirt project contains reports, but you can also integrate with it, and you can generate reports of your own. And as I said earlier, in the second part of the session, I'll show you some other use cases where you can use that. So for now, we expose three types of three ways for you to use the API. One of them is using the REST API itself. The other one is using an SDK, and the third one is just to use a shell. Now, the SDK is based on the REST API, and the shell is based on the SDK, the Python SDK in this example. So basically, you have three ways you can use the API. Now, the question is what method you should use, and that depends highly on who you are, what you want to do, what's your role in the organization you work with. For example, if you're a sysadmin that has a small environment and you would like to do some troubleshooting and you don't want to open the UI and to wait, and sysadmin they just love CLI. I was a sysadmin once, so I know now open the browser and stuff like that. So I just want to have a look and view a few things. So you can just use the shell in order to run some operations, to view some stuff. If you're a data center admin managing a larger environment, then perhaps you can get lost in the CLI. So you would probably want to make some predefined scripts that fit you best. So perhaps you would use the SDK in order to do that. And if you're a software developer running in a specific environment where you don't have really an SDK, then you can just use the REST API natively using the HTTP clients that are available in your environment. So it highly depends on who you are, what's your level of expertise, and what you're trying to do. The concepts of the API, and when I say API here, I mean all the types of APIs, is that they are all integrated through the oVirt engine. And they are all based on the REST as a core, SDA on top of it, and the shell on top of that, as I said earlier. Another thing that's very important for us is backward and forward compatibility. So we would be able to use the current API with the current SDK, the current shell with older versions of the oVirt engine, and also use older SDK with newer versions. We sometimes break that, but we usually try to keep it as compatible as possible, to leave all the options available. And if we're deprecating them, it takes a few versions until they get deprecated. We give secure access to the API. You need to supply credentials in order to use the API. And another thing we added, I think about a year ago, is session-based access. And we'll talk about that later on. So the API, it's a REST API. Are you familiar with REST? Okay, so if not, it's practically built of 4 building blocks, in my opinion, 4 different HTTP methods that you use. One of them is get, in order to get a resource. One of them is post, in order to create a new resource in a collection. One of them is put, in order to modify the resource, and delete, in order to delete the resource. Just as simple as that. Usually, it supports 2 different media types, XML and JSON. And we support that as well. And when we're looking at the structure of a generic REST, and specifically in our environment, you have the protocol you're using, whether it's HTTP or HTTPS, the server and the port, basically the endpoint you're using, the API, which is the entry point for all the REST API. And then afterwards, you have a collection. In this example, it's the VMs collection. Then a resource inside this collection, a sub-collection. VM has disks, so the disks are a sub-collection at the VM inside the specific VM. And there you can access a specific disk, and it can go on according to the collections and sub-collections you have. So that's the structure of the URI. It's usually like that in REST applications. You have a collection, a resource, a subcollection, a resource in that, and that's practically it. And as a result, you get the resource. In here, I put it in XML format. So you have the metadata of the resource, the details on the resource. In here is the VM, so the name of the VM, the status of the VM, memory, CPUs, when it was started, and etc. And the actions that are available on this resource, on this VM, and links to other resources. For example, the VM, for example, has disks, so you can access the specific disks of this VM, so it's a link to another resource. Or the NICs of the VM, the cluster that the VM is part of, and etc. So that's the way it's divided. I'll just say that the actions in here are not related in any way to the status of the VM. I saw that specifically Delta Cloud and other projects as well show you the actions you can actually do on the resource in its current status. So it's not the fact. In here we show you all the actions that can be done on the resource at specific times. But perhaps you try to stop a VM that's not running, so it tells you it's not running. Just a note about that. So in order to list the VMs, you just do a get on the VMs collection. If you want to get a specific one, you also use HTTP get with a specific ID. Create a new VM using post, giving the VM details. Updating, in here we rename the VM, so we just pass the new name of the VM. And in order to delete it, we just do HTTP delete and give the resource ID, the resource itself, the URI to the resource. Are there any questions? I mean, it's basic stuff, but perhaps something is not clear, so I'll be happy to.
Yeah, also, can you also use the API to manage the Oved node, the VDSM stuff, or it may apply to the VMs and the
No. So basically, a VDSM is a host in the oVirt engine. So you can use, so we have a collection of hosts, and you can do different operations on hosts. Now, that depends on what do you want to manage inside the VDSM node. I mean, we give you the way to add new hosts, which will install VDSM on them, and to delete them, and to modify different properties of the host. But perhaps, but we don't expose in the oVirt engine every configuration that can be done on the host. We just configure that for you in a way. We try to put everything in the engine and free configuration that's relevant for you as a user, but perhaps you would want to hack that for one reason or another. So, yeah. But when you will access API/host, you will see the host the oVirt engine is aware of. And you will be able to do different operations. I'll show you in a second how you can easily know what you can do with a specific resource. So there are different, I won't get deeply into that, but there are different clients you can use in order to run these HTTP commands, different REST clients that are available in the different browsers, or command line utility like curl, for example. This is just an example using curl to get a specific VM. So in here you pass the username and the password. You say you want to get an XML. You say the HTTP method is get, and you give the URL of the specific VM you want to use. If you want to create a VM, you need to do HTTP post, and the three parameters needed, the minimum parameters needed that you need to supply in here is the name of the VM, the cluster that the VM will reside on, and the template the VM is created from. So you would just also use curl with the -d option and give the body of the VM you want to use. It's very standard use of REST API. In here to update the VM, to rename it. So you just use the -t option with curl, giving it the properties you would like to change in the VM. And in order to delete, you issue the delete the delete command, give it -x delete. Now, it's a bit hard to understand what you can and can't do with a specific resource in the environment. It's a common problem for REST in general because you don't really know what's exposed. You don't really know what is mandatory to pass when you create a new resource. You don't really know what you can modify in the resource. So for that reason, we created something we call RSDL, which is a RESTful Services Description Language. I didn't see it being used in other projects, but I think it was a very good idea to do that, and I'll show you in a second an example for that. So basically, it describes the parameter constraints that you have using the REST API, and basically it helps you understand how can you create a resource, what actions are available on a specific collection, what parameters do you need to pass, which one is mandatory, which one is optional, which ones you can't really change, they're read-only. And the best way is just to show you an example. So in here you see I access the oVirt API. Do you see well the screen, everyone? Okay. And the question mark RSDL. So let's assume I would like to know what I can do with the VMs collection. So let's look for /API/VMs. Okay. So I got this one. Okay, so I see that if I want to add a new VM to the collection, I need to use the HTTP method, the post HTTP method. In the headers, I need to supply the content type. It's a required field. There are 2 additional fields here that are optional. And when I get to the body, I know that I need to pass a VM object and different parameters. So I see that the VM name is required. The template that the VM is created from is also required, either the ID or the name of the template. The cluster is required. And I have a lot of other options here that are optional. Okay, I see the type of the parameter I want to use. I need to use, and that's basically it. So I can just look at that and understand what I can do. I can parse that in order if I want to create some client of mine that can do different operations. If I want to create a fancy UI, so I'll just show the different options to the user. And basically, it's a very powerful thing because it describes you the API, and each time we do a change in the API, it also updates this one. So for every oVirt engine you use, you know exactly what you can and can't do with it, and it's a very powerful thing. Now, if we look, we saw here the add operation. Let's drill down to, there are a lot of options when creating a VM. So let's go to, let's write method post, not method, sorry. So /API/VMs. Let's drill down to next one. Okay, so I see that if I need to get the VM, all I need to do is use the HTTP method get. I see here the header parameters that are in here. Nothing is mandatory. I just have a parameter here which is optional. I can do different search queries in order to get more specific details. Delete. I see that in order to delete, I need to use HTTP delete on this resource. And I guess I will have put next somewhere here. If I would like to update a VM, I need to use the entity, the specific VM entity in the URI. And I also have here a list of all the options I can pass. When updating, nothing is really mandatory. You can update everything. You can do no updates. That depends on you. So, I think it's a very powerful thing, depending again on what you would like to accomplish. So that's the RSDL. And here you see an example. I've uploaded the slides, by the way. I changed them a bit, but if you access the website, I guess you can download them and have it available. And so I will skip slides here and there, but all the examples are there. So an additional functionality we have in the API that was added about, I think, a year ago. One of them is a user-level API. At first, we only have admin API. In order to access the API, we needed to have admin permissions in the oVirt engine. I won't go over what admin permission means and how it's created in the oVirt engine, but basically, you needed to be an administrator. And now we also support user-level API. It's just, in order to do that, we just added a new HTTP parameter that says that you would like to work with a filtered view, because users are only able to see specific objects and not all of them. Administrators, by definition in our environment, can view anything. They can't do anything, but they can view anything. And also session support. There is some overhead in the REST calls, because each time we need to authenticate the user and to check for LDAP credentials and verify that. So we used cookies in order to create a session, basically, that you log in at the beginning, and then you can do different operations and then log out at the end. There are more details about that in a wiki page. Just nice to know that it's available. Are there any questions so far? Okay, so let's move to the shell. We basically, the concepts that we did the shell with are to make it interactive, to make it as easy as possible to use with auto-completion, using arrow keys in order to do everything you're familiar with any other shell, to pipe commands in it, and stuff like that. We also have help, which is smart help. Basically, you can get an help on a specific command, on a command on a sub-collection, or command on a collection. You can just do help and see all the commands you can do. Let's skip to just show some demo of that. So let's disconnect. I have one that's disconnected. Yeah. So that's the oVirt shell. I just run oVirt shell, and I see it's a bit cut on the left. I apologize on that. I didn't have enough time to try and fix that. Basically, I see that I'm disconnected. Then I'm issuing the connect command, and if I do a double tab, I see the different options. I need to supply the username, the password, the URL, sorry. And that's basically it. And now I'm connected to the oVirt shell. Now I can do list hosts. I can see the different hosts in my environment. I see the ID and the name. Sorry again that it's a bit cut. I see the ID and the name of each host entity, and then I can choose to do show host host one. Then I see different details on this specific host. I can use, my environment is not very live at the moment, so I won't do a lot of different operations in here. What I can show you is like help action, for example. Okay, so I see the different, let's try, not too much. I see that when I need to do some action, I see that I need to supply the type of the object I want to operate on, the name of the object, and the action I would like to do. Let's, for example, help action VM. Let's give a name of the VM and start. Okay, let's see. I didn't do this stuff. So for a specific VM, I can migrate, I can move it, I can stop it, suspend it, export it, shut it down, etc. I see all the different operations I can do. Again, it's not related to the status of the current status of the VM, but it shows you all the operations that you could have done with it in different lifetime options. I can try to do action via workshop start. It will probably fail because my environment is not alive at the moment. But that's the way I can do different operations. I can delete the VM. I can show the VM details, show VM workshop, and have the different details. So you can basically do through the shell anything you could do with the API, anything you could do with the SDK. It's all the same thing. It all leads to the same functionality. If you found out that something that you can do in the API you can do with the shell, open a bug, it will fix that. It's not by design. If I remember correctly, the shell uses automatically a REST session. So you have a session, you don't re-log in every time. So it's more performant. I know some people are against using the word session with the word REST because it has some contradiction, but we don't really save anything in this session besides the fact that you can do operations. It has no state. So when you ask for a resource, you ask for the resource and you get the current resource. It's not cached everywhere. It's not saved anywhere. So the session in here is only in order to be more performant. Okay, I have some more examples in the slides. You can ask for a specific, if you list a specific resource, list VMs, for example, a specific collection, you can choose to show all the properties. You can filter them out using either a query at the client side. That means that the CLI gets all the information and it does the filtering in the client, or to send a query to the oVirt engine to filter some objects out, depending on what exactly you would like to do. You can add, update, or remove a resource. I show some help example. Again, if I would like to install a new host, for example, as you asked, so I did action host Atlantic install and give the root password, which is the only parameter I need to pass that. When I will use the CLI, it will show me what parameters are available for that operation. If I'll use the help, I'll also see further details about each parameter. So it's very convenient. In here, we added a new VM based on the blank template, and we put them in the default cluster. We updated the OS type of the VM. We added a new NIC to the VM, so we said add NIC. The VM identifier is this. The name of the NIC is this. And the network I want to create the NIC in is this. It's just as simple as that. In here, we see an example to create a new disk. Again, passing all the parameters, and then attaching the disk to the VM. Originally, disks were not a main collection, so we always had disks inside VMs. And now disks are also a collection of its own, so you can create a disk and attach it later on. We decided to do the attachment also using a create command. Although it doesn't really create a resource, it just connects an existing resource to a sub-collection of the VM. Here we see how to create a template. Create template, what's the VM name you want to create the template from, and what's the name of the template. And when the template is created, we can create a VM from it. Again, there are endless examples. Just wanted to give you some basics on what you can do with that. Are there any questions? Yeah.
For example, if the database is down, can I still log in?
I guess that if the database will be down, you won't be logged in. I mean, you can debug problems that are problems with your host and with your different resources, but not infrastructure issues. So what you're describing is an infrastructure issue, so it will probably make the engine unavailable. So you can't really debug that. But if there is a problem with one of your hosts or your storage domains, then you can use the CLI in order to ask, show me the storage domain, and you see the storage domain is in down state or inactive, stuff like that. You see if someone, I don't know, calls you and says that the VM is down, can you check it out? So you can use the CLI in order to do it quickly instead of going into the management portal and checking that. So,
Okay.
but not, if you have an infrastructure issue with the engine itself, then most of the times the API won't help. You have something to add on that, Omer?
Maybe, sometimes if you are logged in on the same machine and as the JBoss, you could have an access without the password or stuff like that.
The architecture is that all requests are done through the engine. So any request, if it's user portal, administrator portal, or one of the SDKs using the REST API, go through the engine. So if the engine is down, if we have no database, the engine will be down. So if the engine is down, you cannot update it.
Okay.
So it means you have to do manual investigation with the log and stuff like that. It's exactly what it is.
Okay, so let's move to the third section of the first section. I promise that the second section of the session is more interesting than that. We have a lot of technical details here, but it's the building blocks for later on. So the SDK is mainly used for integration or automation, advanced automation in that case. It's object-oriented. We currently have two bindings for that, a Java and the Python one. As I said earlier, the CLI is based on the Python one. The Python one was the first binding we had. There are a few other projects that created different bindings or different wrappers for the REST API. One of them is GObject wrapper, libgoVirt, and the other one is RBOvert, which created a Ruby binding. I'm not sure how, I know that RBOvert is not a complete binding for the API. I'm not sure about libgoVirt. I have the links in here. You can browse and have a look if it's interesting for you in your environment. The examples I'll show here is for the Python SDK. The Java SDK is pretty similar, just in Java. There are some examples also in our website. So again, the concepts are to have a complete protocol abstraction, just like the CLI, just like the API, full compliance with the oVirt API. Auto-completion is more a feature, of your development environment, but you can use that. It's very intuitive to use. It's auto-generated, so once we have a new change to the API, if we do it properly, it will propagate from the engine to the API to the SDK, the Python SDK, the Java SDK, the CLI, everything will be updated. I can't say that for RBOvert and libgoVirt because they are different libraries, but for the Java and for the Python SDK, it's completely auto-generated. So in Python, when we want to start working with the engine, we create a proxy. So we create a new API object, passing the URL, the username, and the password, and that's pretty much it. Now we have an object in hand which we can use. For example, listing all the collections, API. I can see, for example, I have the VMs collection. I can do API.vms. Something I can add a VM, get a VM, list all the VMs, and etc. Very convenient to use. There are two additional options. These are exactly the ones I described earlier. One of them is to have a filtered session, a user level API. If you want, for example, to create your own user portal, you can use the SDK with the filter option, so you will only show the user objects it can use. And you can use persistent authentication in order to use the REST session. I can do API VMs list and pass a query saying I would like to see only this VM. I can give another constraint about the memory. I want to get only VMs that have this memory. Again, one of them is passing the query to the engine, and the other one is doing the query on the client side. Again, depending what you would like to do. We have both options. You can ask to get a specific VM, and then you can start it, for example, using vm.start. Again, it's all auto-completion depending on your environment. If you prefer VI, then I can't really promise that. But anyway, you can access different properties on the VM, for example, the name of the VM, access a sub-collection. For example, I would like to add a new NIC to the VM, so I access the NIC sub-collection, press add, passing the required parameters. We'll see an example for that. Here is an example for creating a new VM. So in order to create a VM, I need to say what cluster I want the VM to be in, from what template to create that, and that's practically it. So I can pass more parameters, but these are the mandatory ones. So first of all, I get the clusters, the specific cluster I want. Then I get the template I want. Then I create, in this example, we created a new params.vm object, giving all these parameters and adding the memory I would like the VM to have. And then I'm accessing the VM's collection, issuing an add action, passing the parameter that I've created, and that would create a new VM resource. If I would like to create a new disk, I say what storage domain I want to create a VM on, the disk on, and in here we just say API disks add to create a new disk entity. The parameters are, this is the name, this is the size, status, interface, format, and etc. Once you created a new disk, you can attach it to the VM. Again, using vm.disks.add, because we add a new disk resource in the VM, and passing the disk ID and saying we would like to activate it now. We support hot plugging of disks in oVirt, so you can do that. Here is an example with NICs, getting NICs with specific interface type. And you can find more examples in our website, but just basically to give you the knowledge that you could do anything with that. Anything you could do in the API, anything you could do with the CLI. Any questions so far? Okay, I'll describe Delta Cloud in just a few slides. Basically, I saw you 3 types of APIs you can use. The Delta Cloud project adds other APIs to that. Are you familiar with that project? No. So basically, it's an open source Apache project that comes to abstract the differences between different cloud providers. It basically exposes specific 3 types of APIs on top of all the cloud provider it supports. So it gives you a way to work with different cloud providers using a unified API. They support 3 types of APIs currently. One of them is Delta Cloud API, which is their own API, and EC2 API, which is the Amazon Cloud API, and the CME API, which is the Cloud Interface, Cloud Infrastructure Management Interface API. The later 2 are a bit, they're not fully complete, but a lot of options are in there. So Basically, if you have an environment with a lot of different cloud providers or virtualization providers you use, and you would like to work with a common set of APIs on top of that, then you can use Delta Cloud. It supports oVirt as well. Again, just a way to use another set of API. So these are the APIs that are exposed, and inside the Delta Cloud servers, you have different drivers that knows to talk to different cloud providers. I won't go into any further details. If it interests you, if you already work with a specific environment that has support for EC2 API and would like to work with oVirt as well, you can check it out and see if it fits you. Again, the protocol support is not complete yet. I can also say that it looks like the project is not advancing now as I would have expected to proceed. I mean, but who knows what's going to happen. I also have a specific blog post on that, so you can go ahead and read it. It has some examples of using Delta Cloud on top of oVirt. So we're going to move to the second part of the session. Any questions so far? Okay. So in the second part, we're going to talk about UI plugins. I'll show a demo of a plugin. I'll show some examples in the slides. Then we're going to talk about the scheduling plugins or scheduling API. And then on VDSM hooks, they give you different ways in order to customize, in order to extend the functionality of the engine, change it to fit your needs. And again, you would probably use, you can use the SDK. You would usually, I guess you would use the SDK in the UI plugins and scheduling API. But you're free to do whatever you want. So I'll show some examples. I hope it will be clear. So first, UI plugins. If you're familiar with our UI, then great. If not, it basically consists of two main parts. One of them is a tree view of the different objects in my system. And the other one in here is a tabbed view that every main entity in our infrastructure has a main tab, data centers, clusters, hosts, networks, and etc. So what we allow to extend currently is this section. If you want to add a new main tab to your system, if you want to add a new sub-tab to the system, then for a specific, in the context of a specific main entity, for example, in here it's a host, you can do that. You can add new action buttons. You can add new context menu items. Basically, in here we can see everything that's possible: custom main tab, custom action button, custom context menu item. They can be, a new menu item can be both in here and in here, or only in the panel, or only in the context menu, and the custom sub tab. So basically, you can change the way, you can add things into the UI we have, and we give you a set of tools in order to do that. I'll go over these tools. Basically, looking at the most basic plugin you could use, it's just an HTML file with a JavaScript section. The first part will contain accessing the API, telling I would like the plugin API, my name is my plugin. And then I'm registering event handler functions. In this case, I register the UI init event. The UI init event is event that's triggered when the admin portal is initialized. And the only thing I did here is adding a new main tab. That's the label. That's a unique identifier. And that's a URL. That's it. So basically, that would create me a new main tab. That will be the label, and when I will go to this main tab, it will access the URL http foo.com. At the end, I'm telling the API, the plugin infrastructure I'm ready to use, so that triggers basically all the different events. So that's a very basic plugin, just add a new main tab to the system. So we have the basics in the UI plugin contains the HTML file of the plugin. That's the one we saw a second ago. And we have a plugin descriptor, which is a JSON file containing different configuration items we need the plugin to have. And we can override it if we install the plugin with a specific configuration and we would like to override it, then we can create a new file in order to do that. So the locations of the plugins are user share oVirt engine UI plugins. The configuration file is also in that directory using a JSON file. And if we want to override the configuration, it's in etc oVirt engine. I'll show examples. I know it's a bit confusing for now, but I will show you. I will go over the API and then I'll show some examples. So basically what we allow you to do is to add a new main tab, to add a new sub-tab. Again, sub-tabs are these ones, are the tabs that are available when you select a specific entity in the main tab. You can change the URL of the sub-tab. Again, assuming that you have a host's main tab and you go between the hosts, and each time you select another host, you want the URL of the subtab to point to another URL. For example, let's take, an external application you integrate with that is aware of this host. So when you press on a host, you want to access the URL that this application has for this host. I'll show an example of the Foreman plugin I created. So Foreman, for example, is aware of both the hosts and the VMs. So if you stand on a VM and you want to see details that aren't available in the oVirt engine, and they are available in Foreman or in another application you use, then you can set the URL of the subtab to point to that specific URL in the application you need. That way you can extend the view of the view the administrator sees when he logs in to the admin portal. You can also set whether a tab is accessible or not. For example, there may be entities that the tab should be accessible, and for example, others that don't, according to specific properties. So you have control on that as well. You can add new action buttons. These are the buttons that I showed you. These are these ones. So when you add a new action button, you say what is the entity, what is the main entity that the action button should be in, what's the label, what's going to happen when you press the button, and that would basically give you this functionality. We also have a show dialog option. For example, you can have an action button that you press on it and it opens a new dialog pointing to some URL. And these are the main functions that the UI plugin API gives you. Some other useful ones are ones that show you what's the logged in username and what's the user ID. If you want to do some single sign-on solution between the web admin, the admin portal of oVirt, and the other application, and you need the username for that, so you have access to this information. We have different events that the UI plugin infrastructure supports. The UI init event is the one I showed you earlier that is triggered when the admin portal is generated, is initialized. For each entity, I have a selection change event. For example, if you are in a data center main tab and you selected a different data center, you change the selection, then the data center selection change event will be triggered. If you're in the VMs main tab and you selected a new VM, then the VM's selection change will be triggered. So basically for each main tab, we have an event for each selection change. We'll show examples on that as well. We have a user login or logout event. If you're doing some single sign-on between the admin portal and a different application, then you would probably want to log in. When you log into the admin portal, you would like to log into the external application, and when you log out, you would want to log out from this application. Two other events that are useful in this scope are the REST API session acquired. That's basically the way the UI plugin API gives you to modify, to do operations on the engine. Okay, in the UI plugin, you can have you can point to a specific URL, but the fact that you're doing a UI plugin with the engine means that you want to affect the engine functionality. So you get here the UI plugin infrastructure create a REST API session for you, and it gives it to you. And then you can use it in order to manipulate specific operations, to manipulate specific things in the engine. For example, a nice plugin that NetApp wrote that allows you to create a new a volume in one of their filers and use a storage domain on that. So you would have a main tab for, I don't remember if it's a main tab or an action button, but anyway, you say I would like to create a new volume and a new NetApp volume, and then it will open you the URL of the NetApp application, and you select the different NetApp properties. Again, it's an external application. And then at the end, it creates the volume and it wants to push it into oVirt as a new storage domain that you can use. So what we did here is we gave them the opportunity, we gave them the REST API session, and they can use it in order to add the storage domain to the system. Am I clear? Is the flow clear, or Omer? No? Is that clear, or? So it just gives the plugin the strength to do different operations. The other approach we could have taken is to give a specific operation for everything. So we decided to give just access to the API, which is more powerful. I'll show an example and then I'll move along. The example I'm going to show you here is less useful, I'd say, but more funny. And then I'll show other examples as well. So in here, I log in into the oVirt engine. I hope it will work. When I stood here before the session, it worked one time, and it didn't work one time, and it worked two times. So I'm not sure why it happened. You see here, I select, what's the resolution here? Is a bit. I go to the data center main tab, I select the data center, and I do right click. In here you see I have a new button called Protect My Data Center from Alien Invasion. Okay, and now I have a game. It's not a second. I have an Alien Invasion game that I can play and protect my data center. Now I would like to get out of here. And then it tells me, no, you need to destroy the aliens at least once. And I can tell you it's a very hard game. I tried to destroy that for a few times, and then eventually I just decided to cheat. Okay, I win. That's the cheat in here, and then I can close this dialog. So very stupid dialog if you ask me, but it shows you in this example, you basically created a new action button. You showed a new dialog. Over there was a game, and when I cheated, it created some event. I'll show the code for that. So that's basically it. Very easy. I'll show you the code for that. It's not complicated at all.
What if
What? The
You said when you cheated, it created an event.
no, I meant a message. I'll show you what I meant. Just a second. So it started from. Just a second. Oh, I think I'm in another slide for some reason. Yeah, this one's the correct one. Okay. No, what I meant is one of the events is message received. It's a way for a new dialogue to switch messages between the dialogue and the engine infrastructure. So basically, what we did here is that the dialogue sent a message to the UI plugin telling him that I won. And that's what happened in here. If I'll show you the code for that, again, very simple. I created an init function that adds a new main tab action button. You saw I have a new action button. The scope was a data center. I protected my data center from alien invasion. It's enabled only if one data center is selected. And when I click on that, it calls the open dialog function. Now the location I wanted for my action button was only in the context menu because I don't want my boss to see that I can play Alien Invasion during my work hours instead of managing his data center. So I don't want it to see it up there, so it's just in the context menu when you right click. There is also, I'll show it in a second, there is also a new subtab that was created, again in the data center scope, to show the score I have in protecting this data center from alien invasion. And I also asked to align it to the right. If you see, in here you see the space shooter score. Okay, my score is 5. So the open dialog function called the API show dialog function gave a label of datacenter.name under attack because we give the UI plugin infrastructure the details about the selected object. And we have two buttons that we created in the dialog, cheat and get me out of here. That also gives you a way to open a new dialog, but also get buttons that can get you back to the engine. These are these two buttons. And everything is an event in here, so I have event registration. One of them is the UI init in order to initialize my plugin, and the other one is the selection change of the data center. So again, if I have one data center that is selected, then I have a subtab for it with the score and etc. If I have more than one, then the subtab is not accessible because when you select more than one data center, no subtab should be accessible. And we talked about the message received. The message received event, that's the event that is used in order to exchange messages between the plugin itself and the infrastructure. So I have here several events: game init, game win, and get score. Again, when I cheated, I just posted the game win message to the parent. The parent is the UI plugin. And I called API.ready at the end to tell the oVirt engine that it can start initializing my plugin. Very simple plugin, very simple API. Allows you to add basically buttons and tabs, main tabs and subtabs in every part of the engine. Again, I told you about the NetApp example. I show here another example of a plugin I wrote for Foreman. Basically, what we did there is we added a Foreman dashboard tab. My environment was pretty dead, so we don't see a lot of events here. But if you know Foreman, it has a dashboard, and you can just access the URL of the dashboard to see details. So in here, I created a main tab that just directs you to a URL. In this plugin, I also had to write something in the foreman side to do some more embeddable view of the dashboard, but I won't get into that. Now, when I'm in the virtual machines main tab and I select a virtual machine that Foreman is aware of, I can see here details taken from Foreman, different details on the VM, different activity graphs, and stuff like that. Again, so I'll show the code for that later on, but you understand here that I have a new main tab. So I use the add main tab action. I have a new sub tab in here for Foreman details. And I have a VM selection changed event in order to change the URL that I'm showing in the subtab according to the VM that I selected. And if I selected more than one VM, then the subtab is irrelevant. So is the flow clear? So that's another use case. So again, as I said, add the subtab. I added two subtabs here, one for details and one for graphs. I created a helper function to hide or show the subtabs, not really important in that matter. And I added a new main tab to contact the dashboard. Now, in order to, I used also a configuration of the plugin in order to contain the URL of the Foreman server I'm working with. So just a good use of the configuration. What we wanted to do here is to use some single sign-on operation between Foreman and the oVirt engine. So when we use the REST API session in order to do that. So when the session acquired event was triggered, I knew the plugin code knew that there is a new session, and then it issued a login to Foreman. I also needed to add some code in the Foreman side in order to support this single sign-on operation. Basically, it took the session ID and verified it with the oVirt engine. As simple as that. I won't get into the Foreman side, but just to show you a use case, another use case that you can use the REST API session with. The other use case is to use it in order to do stuff. In here, I only used it in order to do to verify that the user is indeed logged in and that the session is indeed valid in the system. And in the VM, and in the virtual machine selected change event, what I did here is I checked whether one VM is selected or more, and if one VM was selected, I reached Foreman to check whether he is aware of this VM or not, because the VM can be, perhaps it was created not through Foreman. So if it's created through Foreman and Foreman is aware of that, then I will show the subtabs. If it's not created through Foreman, then the subtabs won't be visible. And when the user logs out, in the user logout event, I also logged out from Foreman. That's so this is the function that hides and shows the subtabs, not really important, but the only important part here is that I changed the subtab content URL according to the name of the selected VM. In here, I see you api.set tab content URL. So this function is called in case that the VM was found as a host in Foreman. So I construct the URL and I set the subtab URL. So when you press the subtab, you will get to the proper URL in Foreman. Is that clear? Another thing I wanted to mention is that we added a new feature to allow you to let's show the UI for a second. In our UI, we have an events subtab in order to show different events that happened in the system that relates to the specific entity. We added the ability to inject external events into the engine. So what you would do as a plugin that creates, for example, let's take again the NetApp example because I think it's a good one. You created a new volume. So when you press the button, the NetApp can say, okay, I started to create a new volume in my filer and to give the exact details, and that would be added as an event to the oVirt engine. Then it can create it. Then when it finished creating, it can send an event. It can add an external event saying the volume was created successfully. Now I'm going to start creating the storage domain connected to the volume. So it gives you a way to do even a more deep integration, so the administrator knows what's happening right now. It's not. He didn't just press a button. He knows that the volume is now the creation of the volume is now in progress. He knows that the creation failed or succeeded, and it's not just a black box that it doesn't know what's the status of things that are happening. So it's also powerful because you can, as an administrator using this system, you can be aware of what's happening in your environment. So that's a new addition in 3.3, I think, right? No?
Yeah.
I think only in 3.3, yeah. Any questions on the plugin, UI plugins? Okay, there are a few other examples in our website. One of the nice plugins that a guy, I don't remember his name, but he works at a company called Oved, which is funny because I'm Oved Ourfali, so and people tend to confuse the two of us. So anyway, he created a plugin that works with Nagios, right? I forgot about it. In order to show you different statistics on your VMs, on your hosts, and etc. It's a great plugin. You should try install it and use it, and also see it as an example. If you're interested in writing a plugin, he did some more complex stuff than I did here in these examples. Okay, so moving along to the next feature, which is the scheduling API feature. So that's an email we got from one of the users. He wanted to define the maximum number of running VMs on a host. Okay, and we didn't give him the way to do that. So the scheduling mechanism we had so far was based on a distribution algorithm that was defined on the cluster. One of them was, we had two policies basically on the cluster. One of them is evenly distributed in order to evenly distribute the VMs around the hosts. And the other one was power saving in order to do the exact opposite, to use, that in off-peak hours not to use all the hosts, that some hosts can be even shut down if it needs to. So basically these were the policies, and the scheduling mechanism, which basically says I would like to run this VM, used one of these policies in order to decide where the VM should run. We also had a load balancing mechanism that we, in a specific point in time, periodically, we ran the load balancer and we asked him, okay, do we have here a VM that needs to be migrated to another host in order to be more compliant with the policy? For example, if we are in evenly distributed policy and we have one host that's running a lot of VMs, then perhaps we will try to migrate VMs from this host to other hosts in the system. So we only had two distribution algorithms, taking into consideration only CPU usage, basically. And we didn't give you any way to construct your own policy. So the new scheduling mechanism, again introduced in oVirt 3.3, gives you a way to do that through several mechanisms. One of them is a filter module. Filter module basically, as you see in the slide, allows you to filter out hosts that you don't want the VM to run, on, for that reason or another. For example, I started with 4 hosts. For the first filter, filtered out host number 3, and the second one filtered host number 1 as well. And so I was left with 2 hosts that are available to run my VM. Now I can do any logic I want. I can say I have a specific network network infrastructure I need on the host running this specific VM, and I'm aware of that because I'm in my environment I have something special about them, so I can write a new filter saying if the host is one of these and it has this capability, then I can run this VM. And for another VM, maybe this condition is irrelevant. So the filter module allows me to do that. The other module is the wait module, which allows you, once you have a set of a whitelist of hosts that can run the VM, you want to choose the best one, the one that fits best in order to, according to some wait module that you have. So again, you can have more than one wait module, and eventually you will get the weight of the host. The lower the weight is, the more chances this host will be selected as the one running the VM. So again, the filter module, easy to write and maintain. It's chained up. We have a filter chain in there. We can add custom parameters. Existing logic that we had in the system, when you create a new VM, you can pin it to host. For example, we added a new, once we added this infrastructure, we added a new filter to do that internally in the system. And we also added the ability to write new external filters in Python, and that can be loaded into the engine. So if I'm going back to the example, I would like to define the maximum number of running VMs on a host. Then I want my filter to filter out hosts that running more than 3 VMs. So I create a Python class called maxVMs. I have a doFilter function over here that gets the host IDs. These are the IDs of the hosts that are available for now for me to run the VM on, and the VM ID. And I have here some arguments. For example, the maximum number of VMs is an argument that I get as an input in here. So what I need to do, basically, if you don't look at the code for a second, what I need to do is to go over all the hosts, identify the ones running more than the maximum number of VMs or the maximum itself, and filter them out. That's the only thing I need to do. So I use the API in order to do that. I construct, like we saw earlier in the SDK section, I construct a connection to the API, giving the username, the password, and the URL. And we query for the hosts. Again, we go to the hosts collection, asking to list hosts, and to choose only hosts that are in the list of host ID, with an ID that is from the host IDs I got as an input. And then I'm going over the hosts one by one, and I'm checking whether the number of active VMs on the host is smaller than the maximum. If it is, then I can use these hosts in order to run the VM. If it's not, then I can't. So this function basically filters out VMs, a host that have more than 100 VMs in this part, in this case. Am I clear?
So this is basically using the Java SDK.
The Python SDK. This is Python.
Okay.
Yeah. It's using the Python SDK to do that. The only thing I found a bit, just being honest with you, because when I prepared the slides here, I saw that something, I didn't write this feature, the scheduling API. And what bothered me here most is that you need to pass the username and the password, etc., in order to do that. And you saw a second ago the solution we had for UI plugins, that we gave you some REST session. So perhaps we would do that in here as well, to give you some session. The only difference is that for the UI plugins, you really logged into the system. This one is a periodic, it's both periodic or user-generated event, depending on whether you're load balancing or running a new VM. But perhaps it would be nice to give a session ID in here as well. But were you going to ask something? Because that's okay?
And how, why did you use here an object, a class? Why not just use a function for the max VM? Is this related to how the filters work? Or
I think it looks for different classes that have the doFilter function when it scans for the directory. I'm not sure about that. I mean, I think that's the case, but perhaps it's enough.
You will get later to the part of what events can trigger. a
Yes. So the
filter.
events, I will get there, but basically, what will trigger the filter? The filter will be triggered in a few use cases. One of them is just you decide to run the VM. Okay, so you go to the or to the API or the CLI or the SDK or the web admin or the user portal, whatever you want, and you press play on the VM. You say, I would like to run this VM. So that would call the oVirt scheduler and ask him to select a host to write, to run the VM on. Okay. So the first thing it would do is it would check what available hosts are in the cluster. Okay. Available hosts are hosts that are in an up state, and that would be the big list of hosts. Okay. Now all the filters start running one by one, and each filter can filter out hosts until we're left with a smaller set of hosts. That the wait function.
Yeah, that's clear. This is
Yeah.
one use case.
Yeah.
I might want to trigger the filter in a number of cases, maybe a hardware failure, time of the day, I don't know.
So perhaps a hardware failure may cause a migration to work, and the filter will work in migration as well. You can't trigger that. That it triggers only when the regular scheduler would have triggered. Load balancing is another example that periodically we check if we need to migrate a VM, so it will be triggered as well. You would basically trigger, in the case you're representing, perhaps you will have a script that triggers a VM migration event, and the VM migration event will eventually trigger that. But you won't trigger that directly. You will just trigger migration, and that will happen. Okay, so that's the filter. Now, assuming I'm left with several hosts, I have the wait module. Again, the lower the better. We use the current policies we have for evenly distributed and power saving, and we created a wait module for them. I won't get into that, but you can create external wait modules in Python again. So in this example, I show the the evenly distribution. So what we do here again is we have a class with the doScore function, getting the host IDs and the VM IDs. These are the hosts that were left after all the filters ran. Okay, these are host 2 and host 4 in our example. And I get the VM ID. That's the VM that I want to run or to migrate, depending on the use case. And what we're going to do here is add is getting the number of active VMs on each host and adding that to the score set we're returning back. So I would add the host ID, and the weight will be the number of active VMs. So in that case, the host with the best score will be the host running the lowest number of VMs. And if I want to be evenly distributed, I should run the VM on that host. So that's what this wait function does here. Again, you need to access the API in here in order to get the details. Now, the reason we don't expose everything in here, only the host IDs, is because you can have a lot of hosts that can run that are input in here, but maybe you don't want to get the details on all of them. It depends on what you already know. So that's just an optimization in here to give you the IDs. It also keeps the API in here a bit cleaner, even if in the future you will will have other properties and etc. You get an ID and that's it. And the third part in here is a load balancing that's periodically runs and determines whether a VM should be migrated now in my environment. Again, we had two load balancing algorithms evenly distributed and power saving, and we created two predefined load balancing policies for that. And in here, what we basically do in the load balancer is we check if we have in here, we run on all the hosts, and we check if the number of active VMs on the host is smaller than the maximum. If that's the case, then the host is in the whitelist. If that's not the case, then perhaps we have here an overloaded host. So we save that host for later on. So what happens eventually is that if we didn't find an overloaded host, then we don't need to do any migration at all because no host is overloaded. Everything is okay. We don't need to do anything. But if we found a specific host that is overloaded, which means it has more than the maximum number of VMs, then we pick a VM and we say, please migrate this VM to one of these whitelist hosts. The whitelist host is the hosts that have less than the maximum number of VMs running. So if I have, for example, one host that's running 102 VMs and three hosts that are running 90 VMs, then I will choose, then I will put the host running 90 VMs in my whitelist, and I will choose one VM running on the overloaded host and say, please migrate this VM to one of these hosts. Okay, is it clear?
When the host is selected.
What?
When you select the host. Okay, you have a white
You.
list. It's a list of.
Oops, sorry. Yeah, so later on it will choose one of the hosts. I mean, this code runs after, basically, after that it will run filters and it will run weights. So it's just the initial phase just to choose. The input here will be passed to the filters and then to the weight, and then a host will be selected. So as I said, you can write external policy units. You place them in user share, oVirt scheduler proxy plugins, and we analyze for filter, weight, or balance functions. We cache the results and we export that in the UI. So here is the UI for that. You can add or edit a cluster policy, and in that you can enable different filters. Now, some of the filters, as you see here, like CPU and network, are predefined filters. And there is here max VMs, the max VMs filter I showed you earlier that was enabled. It's just, you just drag and drop filters into this policy. Then on the second section, you have weight modules, and you drag and drop different weights into that. Again, you see here EXT stands for external weight functions, and you see the predefined ones in here as well. And you select one load balancer for each policy. In here, because we use the max VMs filter, we have here a property called maximum VM count that needs to be configured for this cluster policy. So that's the first part, creating a new cluster policy. And then if you go to the cluster, it's hard to see in here, but the cluster main tab, and you select the cluster, you can edit the cluster policy, selecting the policy that we created a second ago, and you can override this property from the default that was created in the cluster policy. That's a way for you to apply the cluster policy in your specific cluster. So that will eventually tell what filters will run, what wave functions will run, and what load balancer logic will run. It's a very powerful feature, depends if you need that. Any questions so far? So bear with me a few more minutes and we're over. I know it's a long session, so the next part we'll talk about VDSM hooks. The VDSM hooks is a pretty, I wouldn't say old, but it's a feature that's been there from the beginning. So UI plugins appeared a year and a half ago, and the scheduling API is just straight from the oven. You have here links to explanation on the VDSM hooks and also a catalog of hooks. Basically, a hooks is a mechanism to customize, to do different customization. It allows you as an administrator to define scripts that modify a VM operation, modify things on the host running the VM, like modifying the VM configuration, running system scripts. In here you see that we have VDSM, and when we create a new VM, when we would like to run a new VM and we select the host, we eventually get to VDSM telling him, please create the VM on the host. And VDSM calls libvirt in order to do that. But in between the call to libvirt, you can write a hook to modify the VM just before it gets to libvirt. And you can do also specific operations in the hook that don't change the VM. If you want to write something to a log, or if you would like to add some entry in the IP tables for that specific VM, you can do that. So hook scripts are called at specific VM lifecycle events. As I said, they can modify the VM or apply a specific rule or run any command you want. So the different lifecycle events you can use is when VDSM starts, before and after the VM starts, before a migration event, before you pause the VM, before you hibernate the VM, continue, when you stop the VM. For example, if you created a new IP table entry in the VM, when you ran the VM, maybe when you stop it, you want to delete this entry. So you would use both the before VM start and on VM stop. Yeah. You can also hook to hot plugging before you hot plug a NIC and after you hot plug a NIC, I think for disk as well. Mention that. So when you stand on a specific VM, you see selected a virtual machine here, main tab, and selected a specific virtual machine. You go to the custom properties side tab, and in here you see the different hooks that are available for this VM, and you can pass different parameters to them. I'll skip this slide for a second. This is an example of a hook. What this hook does is add a watchdog device. It's basically a device that identifies something wrong happened to the VM, and if the VM crashed, it can do a specific operation. In here, we decided that we do a reset action. So I think that now we have the watchdog support already inside the oVirt engine, but before we had this support, people said, we want to use that. Why can't you allow us to use that? So an easy way to add this functionality is to tell them, or to write a hook by ourselves, just write a hook. What the hook does, it takes the domain XML of the VM. That's the XML that VDSM created in order to pass it to libvirt to run the VM. We get the devices section, and we create a new element in the devices section to add a new watchdog device, telling him I would like to have the reset action, and we add it to the devices XML, and we write the domain XML. So basically what we did here is we took the XML, added a device, saved the XML, And then that's the XML that will be passed to oVirt. That's it. And we have support. No need to add a UI for that. No need to add engine code for that. Only add the hook and configure that in the VM custom properties.
And the hook will be deployed automatically by the engine?
No. You will need to put the hook manually on the hosts relevant for that. For that hook.
And if the VM migrates to another host?
Then when the VM migrates, you don't really you have a before-after VM migration event. So if in case of migration, the domain XML doesn't change unless you. I'm not sure you can change that. Omer, perhaps you know.
Sorry, what?
You can change the domain XML on VM migration or not? In this case, you won't need to, by the way, because the domain XML contains the device. But just
No, I mean if the VM migrates to another host, it doesn't have the proper hook.
no, but it doesn't need the hook. In this case, it doesn't really need the hook.
No, yeah. In this case,
Yeah, in this case. In other cases, if it needs the hook, then you need to put it there, and you would probably hook to the before migration, after migration, and you see it's before VM migration in or out, so in the source or the destination host. So
Okay,
you
but
would need to,
But the hooks are all deployed and deleted manually.
in there,
All the hooks
Yeah.
are deployed and deleted and modified manually. They are not managed by the engine.
yeah, we're not, as far as I know, we can't really,
I'm not sure about that also. We do have host deployed, but I'm not sure if handles.
yeah, I don't think it has.
Hooks. We have some predefined hooks that for sure comes with BDSM, but custom hooks, users hooks, probably not.
Yeah. We do show you that in the UI. No, it's here. Okay, in the host subtab, you can see the hooks that are on the host. So you can easily see if the hooks are there, but you can't really add new hooks through the, yeah. I think the main use case for hooks, I see several ones. One of them is that someone wants a feature and it's not available yet. You use a hook for now, in the future it will be supported. Another use case is that perhaps you as a third party, you use, for example, I know Mellanox, for example, I don't know if you know this company, used hooks in order to add NICs, InfiniBand NICs into the VM because we didn't have this functionality. If I remember correctly, that's what they did. So basically they wrote a hook. If you put the hook on all the hosts, then you have this functionality. Perhaps it can be added to the engine later on as a native feature if that's what's needed and if it's decided in the community that that's going to be a part of a specific version. But until then, it can be available as a hook. So sometimes hook eventually get to be a feature, sometimes not. So you can also, I'm not sure, it would be nice to test whether we show the hooks through the API. I'm not sure about that, the available hooks, because if we do, then you can write a filter that filters out if you know a specific VM needs the hook, and so you can get the host, get the different hooks, and then see whether it's whether the hook is in the host. That case, you can verify that the VM won't run on a host that doesn't have the hook. But I'm not sure we expose this information.
It's not really easy to tell if maybe a hook applies to some event or not. I mean, the engine has no way of telling. I won't see it in the logs. If on a
That the
host-
hook ran? No, you won't see an event that the hook ran. Not as far as I know. It's strictly a VDSM feature that allows you to do that. The engine just passes the properties so that if you see that I don't know that the watchdog property was added when you created a VM, then then the hook will, you see a condition on the hook. If has key watchdog. If you want past the watchdog key, it won't run. So all the hooks will run, but each hook needs to test whether it needs to be activated. Yeah. Yeah.
Clear, but it doesn't tell the engine that it
No,
ran or it
no.
did something like
You can do it just maybe abusing some of the functionality, but you can use the REST SDK in order to push an external event that the hook was triggered, for example.
right,
Yeah, but it's not something that's there natively. Again, I'm not sure that the hooks are reported at the host. I think not, but I'm not sure about it.
They are reported per host, the same as it is as a setup.
They are
But
what?
You don't have a general hooks collection. You can go to API host, specific host, then hooks. So the same as you have in the UI.
So you have-
subtab, you have hooks sub collection.
Okay. So
in the REST
Yeah,
API.
you can-
yeah, so in that case, you can use a filter for
See
it.
the hooks per host. Yeah.
You can use a filter, and the filter, by the way, can put it will filter out hosts. Maybe you can also trigger some warning somewhere, an event saying that there is a failure that you would have expected the host to have the hook, but it doesn't have the hook. You can do a lot of things. With the combination of hooks, of scheduling API, of using the SDK, you can do a lot of things, and it depends how you want to use that. So hooks catalog, I won't go over that. That appears in the link I showed you earlier. We have a lot of hooks. Some of these hooks maybe attach a LAN to a VM. We already have that as a feature, but before we had that as a feature, you could have done that using a hook. And a lot of others. These are my details, my email address, ovedo@redhat.com. You can see me on the oVirt IRC. I have a blog. Currently it has several entries, not a lot, unfortunately. I need to do some more, but about Delta Cloud and about UI plugins. It has also other, the Foreman plugin was more difficult than it looks. It contained also a part in the Foreman, a plugin in Foreman as well. And there are a few things you need to consider when writing a plugin, which is the cross-origin issue. I won't go into that, but the blog post gets into that, and it's worth reading if you're interested in writing a new plugin. You have the users and the engine devel mailing list. Engine devel is mostly for developers. Users is mostly for users sharing their experience or asking different questions. So you should usually use that one. We'll just go to the oVirt IRC. As I said earlier, going back in time, we have, wasn't that smart, but anyway, we have these sessions. Omer's session about integration with cloud in it tomorrow, and over Developer Day at the KVM Forum, which is your stage to let us know what you want to have in the product. Any questions? Okay, so thank you for your patience. Hope you learned something new.